so I can.
I will send it to you in Discord. It is twitch.tv/Tayogetsu.
Tayogetsu. I want to see your chat too.
Anyway. I think if I open your channel right now, my computer will literally explode. So I'm not going to do that. But I'll be there in spirit.
That would be bad.
You need to upgrade.
Well, yeah, I upgraded my internet today, so hopefully that'll help a little bit.
Nice.
Yeah, so welcome to the stream, everyone who's joining in, and everyone who's already been there. So this is the second episode of our show, which has undergone a rebranding since our first episode, but feeling real good about the second one.
Second time's a charm.
Yeah, so sometimes something shows up in a Google search, sometimes it doesn't. You know, we're learning. So this is our show, Talking as a Free Action, where friends Marvin and Owen get together with other friends. In this case, Tracy.
I am one of those other friends.
To join us. You are one of those other friends who deserves more of a description than just Dungeon Master.
Other friend is not the worst thing that I've ever been called in my life. So,
I mean, I hope we're setting that bar real low. Yeah, so we get together and we talk Dungeons and Dragons stuff, primarily dungeon mastering, since that's something that we're all pretty good at, but not just general D&D stuff, anyways. So, with that, let's jump right in. So, again, Tracy, thank you so much for spending time and chilling with us tonight. We had a couple of things that we were going to talk about, so I guess you're more than welcome to chime in with your opinions and stuff on them, since that's what we do, is talk opinions.
All right. Yeah, I mean, if you want to tee up some of the subjects, I've played it just to give people a background. Like we were talking about this the other day, but the reason. Oh, there's a puppy behind you. That's pretty rad. So I've played since like old times, and I've even gone back in time and played things that were made before I really started playing. But I mean, my first set was the basic set, and of course, before as I got older and enjoyed it, just kind of followed along through all of the editions. But I also did go back and play like Chainmail and some of the stuff that was, the early days stuff that Gary Gygax and his buddies created before Dungeons and Dragons was, the formula for Dungeons and Dragons. So that's my gaming history in a nutshell.
Nice.
Yeah. So needless to say, quite a bit longer than either of us.
Oh yeah.
I'm probably just age. Yeah, I'm just older in general.
I mean, that kind of happens too, right?
Sure.
Yeah, so I know that, with Marvin and I, we both start with 3.5, which is, practically new as far as your play history is concerned. Even though that's quite a long time ago now, even, 15 years ago or something, almost?
Yeah, and I remember when it came out too, that was like a really big deal because like we had been playing second edition for so long at that point. It was like 3.5, like wow, it was a real big media push. I think it was almost even a bigger media push than like 5 was recently. But 5 is ultimately, I think, more successful because people still thought it was very much a niche nerd thing back in the day.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a lot more mainstream now than it used to be. So, sorry, just checking audio. Oh, okay. That's semi-frozen.
Yeah, I'm losing a frame or two here, but that's all right.
Yeah. Happens.
So, yeah. I mean, it's a lot more mainstream now than it used to be. I know it. I don't know. Like, I feel like 5th edition also had a lot going for it because 4th edition was very much disliked by basically everybody. It felt like.
That's super fair. I definitely was not feeling 4th edition the few times I tried it.
Did you try 4th edition, Tracy?
I did, and that was kind of where D20 and all of the offshoots from that came from, which is now like I guess SRD. But like I you know that was at a period of time. I think with 4 was like after I had joined the army when I was younger, and like so I think that there was a period of time where I was no longer playing just because of the situation was the same. But like I can tell you that 4 didn't draw me back in, right? Like I remember like everyone we took a look at 4, we played a little bit, and I was like, it was the same old if anything. But like 3.5 to me, 3.5 and 4 to me were not great. Like they were like they didn't have the renovations. People didn't really consider what people were having trouble with, or at least what was no longer fun or what was too unwieldy. And they weren't doing any kind of like they kept adding systems rather than pulling things out, right? Like and it got to the point where like maybe they simplified a few things like THACO, which was always black magic mathematics, but like the but they still kept adding a bunch of stuff that was like it kind of felt like it got more and more complex. And I think that's why alternative systems really took off at that time, right? Because like Pathfinder went nuts at that time, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Like everybody switched over to Pathfinder, and then because it was more of what we like, kind of the best stuff of 2 with a little bit more modern updates, right? For the D20 systems. Then I don't know. I really like 5 because of the way that it fixes a lot of stuff that we've been complaining about forever that were really hard to deal with, or systems that were just kind of like, why are we calculating so much stuff? Like this could be a lot more simplified. Like the point of the game is to have fun and tell a cool story with your buddies, not like
a ton of arithmetic.
Yeah, you started reaching towards the video game space, right?
Yeah, like I think that's one of the things that really appealed to me for 5th edition, as opposed to 3.5, is because like 3.5, you get like 6 rule books in, and suddenly there's like 4 different rule systems, and suddenly you're asking like, wait, so I get a +2 from here, a +2 from here, a here. What's my base attack bonus?
Right.
And
right.
so you're going through it. It's like you're adding 6 or 7 different figures together to figure out what you're supposed to be hitting for and how much damage you're supposed to be doing, and it just becomes really overwhelming. Especially for like, have you ever tried to teach 3.5 to a new player? It's a nightmare.
Oh God, yeah. Or just like how to build your character, right? Like,
oh Lord.
Yeah, like if I wasn't a high schooler who had nothing better to do, I definitely would have given up because.
Agreed.
100%
agreed.
Like 5th edition's really streamlined. Like I really think that like the advantage idea, like just letting them roll second dice, is probably one of the cleanest updates that I've seen. That like just, hey, what does this do? I don't know, just give them advantage. Oh, does this help me or hurt me? I don't know, give them disadvantage. Like I think it's really, really helpful for like the DM perspective, just in making those kind of decisions a lot easier.
It is super clean, right? Because like then, because then it's just like you can simply decide like this is going to be harder, or you're going to skew it harder, or you're going to skew it easier any given time to kind of complement the story.
Yeah, it's like, oh, do I get a +2 because I'm using an adamantine weapon? It's like, no, just get advantage.
That's very true.
And then you don't have to worry about it. Either they rolled well or they didn't. So I guess since you've been playing for a while, one thing that I'm really curious about, because I know for us, this feels like even like a somewhat recent concept anyway, is the idea of doing like a session 0 before you even start. So kind of getting everybody together and really like talking about your characters ahead of time, maybe like collectively planning your backstory, building your characters together, things like that. To me, that I think it's a new label on a thing that probably has been happening for a really long time. And I know like when I first started DMing, that was still something that I did, even though I didn't call it like a session 0. When you guys were starting out, what were you doing?
Well, like Marvin, do you have an answer for that one?
Oh well, I mean, Owen and I have talked about this more times than I can count. I'm a huge fan of session 0s. Even if you don't focus on party composition or shared backstories or anything like that, just knowing what the party can do as a group can really help with planning out the campaign and helping everybody understand each other and how they're going to roleplay together going forward. Um, that being said, I totally skipped it like the last 3 campaigns I've run.
Yeah, it's one of those things that could be really great, and then you sometimes you just want to get into the action. I was actually going to say that
Yeah.
I think it depends on who I'm playing with, like, and it sounds kind of backwards, but if I'm playing with more experienced players, I would rather do a session 0 with a more experienced group than I would with a less experienced group. And I never want to play with. I mean, like, I've done it, and it's super hard to do. Because somebody who's new to the game, it takes like 4 or 5 sessions for somebody to actually kind of start really figuring out what's going on, or more, right? Like because then they start to go, oh yeah, I need to remember this number, and then like they start to get into the meta game, and then they start realizing, you know, this bigger and deeper world of rules that they kind of want to learn. So in the beginning, I think that it's easier, like with less experienced players. I kind of stretch that session 0 out anyway. And I literally just ask them who they want to be, and I start kind of pushing them to do certain things with their characters, right? But in 0, for like experienced characters, the thing that always gets me is that where there's value is that, like, everybody always wants to be the newest character derivative from the newest book, right? So if you start a new session with a bunch of people, like, everyone rolls in with like, yeah, I want like spirit barbarians, and like everybody's a spirit barbarian, and you're like, okay. You know, and then like, or whatever the newest, like, you know, they're all mousekin sorcerers. Like, what? Hey, you know, like, I think that's cool, but like, you know, maybe a diversity issue is happening here, and I don't really, you know, and you can play a party like that too. That could be some fun storytelling, but I think a lot of players too, like if they're not communicating before they get the session ready to go, they can end up with what ends up being long-term hard to sustain, right? Because if everybody rolls in and like, oh, we're a coven of mousekin sorcerers, because we all wanted to play the newest character type, then, you know, in 10 sessions, are they all still going to want to do that? Are the challenges that normal gameplay present, are they going to prove that some people are going to be like, oh, this is a dumb idea, I need to change this character, and I wasted the first 4 levels as this, and now I can't multi-class. You know what I mean? Like I think your session 0 kind of sets a better foundation for your long-term success as far as that goes.
Yeah, that makes
I
sense.
can see that. I can see that perspective. I think that for me, the biggest part about session 0 isn't even really about the party composition, and really it's more about just making sure that everyone is kind of collectively agreeing to play characters that are not going to come into like party-ending conflict. Because I've seen, you know, people roll character. Oh, I'm playing the antisocial rogue, just, you know, kleptomaniac steals everything, and it's like, yeah, but if you're in the party full of a bunch of, you know, neutral good and lawful good characters, like, you're gonna just end up in a fight with them at some point, and your character's gonna have no choice but to leave. So I think that it's really good to kind of work out some of those things before they happen. Because I know when I said, like, oh, I want to play a chaotic evil necromancer, you gave me a really big long look, because you're like, I don't know what this guy's doing.
Well, yeah, but I mean that question, like, I'll try it on for size, right? But like, you know, if we're honest about it, your character is not really being played as chaotic evil, right? Like, so
No,
you know,
not even close.
which we actually need to discuss your alignment check. But anyway, so like the thing is that
I think the last time we checked, I was neutral evil, but nevertheless,
yeah, we moved you down a notch, because like chaotic evil is like a really, and I think too, like that's one of the things that that's one of the first rules that I discard, because alignment is such a funky spectrum of things that, you know, characters are going to make decisions that aren't great, right? And like everybody kind of falls in on the spectrum where it's like, depending on the situation that they're in, they're going to try different stuff. So, you know, no one's going to be running around frothing at the mouth, like stabbing everybody all the time, right? Like, so, yeah.
And if they are, it's going to be a problem for the party unless everybody is doing that.
Yeah. That sounds like a difficult life in general.
Or it'll be a bigger problem if everybody's doing that.
Yes. Well, it's a far more noticeable problem for sure.
Yeah, although I think that a lot of like newer DMs fall into that's where like say no to anybody, and then they end up in a situation where they have a player who's doing that, and they don't know as a DM on how to handle that situation. Because player characters are often the most powerful, thing in the area, at least for a lot of time. So I think that sometimes newer DMs really run into that wall where they're like, I have a level 6 player who just wants to go in and murder every shopkeep they come across and ransack their place, and I can't just send a level 26 legendary dragon against him, because I think that some players run into a wall on how to handle that.
Yeah, I had a long time ago, when I was about 14 or 15, and I DM'd at 14 or 15 with my friends, and there was like 2 or 3 friends of mine that played, and my one friend, Andy, played a fighter, and no matter what, he always wanted to break up all the furniture and pile it in the corner. Break up all the furniture, pile it in the corner. Break up all the furniture, pile it in the corner. And like he just had a compulsion that like whenever they went into a dungeon, that he would break up all the furniture and pile it in the corner. And it was got this thing. It's like that's a weird twitch, right? It's like the what is it, like the wet bandits or whatever, right? It's like, what the hell? Like why would you do that? It sounds like dumb. But like he insisted, like he had to do that, right? And it's like, okay, and it got to the point where like, yeah, they'd go into town and it'd be like, all right, we got done with our stuff at the store. I break up all this furniture and pile it in the corner. It's like, so you get to the point where like, okay, dude, like if you spend the time piling the stuff in the corner, then the cops are going to come in because this guy's going to be yelling for the city watch. You just busted up all his furniture for no good reason. Anyway, but I didn't really think that the complexity. I think I just told him that was dumb, and I'm going to ignore it from that point forward. That was my solution when I was 14. But if I were to do it now, I would be like, I don't know, like I would have fun with it. I would just feel like, it depends. I think there's a lot of give and take between a good player and a DM and a bad player and a DM. Like there's no really bad players because they're going to play the game they want to play unless they're toxic to other players in the group, right? So like if they're not being harmful or toxic to other players in the group and they're just they're being the character they want to be, then who are you to say that that's wrong, right? So I think now I would have done something more like, hey, is there one, I would ask, like, is there a reason? Like, is it OCD? Is it like, did he get mauled by a mimic at some point in his life? Like, what happened, right? Like, why is this happening? And then
I need to make sure.
Yeah, like there's got to be like I want some pathos here in this story, right? But then the other part, it would be like, hey, you get a cease and desist letter from the Furniture Makers Guild. And they want to know what you have against them, right? And then they start sending assassins or something. You know what I mean? Like it would be, like it would just work it in,
Yeah, and I think that's a big element that ends up. Yeah, and I think Marvin, you and I were talking about this maybe the other day. I don't even remember if it was last episode or not. But the idea of like having the world move beyond like the realm of the players, like the idea that like stuff happens and the players are not observing it. And so, like, that's kind of what you're describing, Tracy, which is, like, there are other characters who exist in this world that are outside of the periphery of the players that have thoughts and opinions and will take actions for or against the players depending on a reputation. Right. And I think that's an element that a lot of new dungeon masters miss because they're thinking about it like a video game, where the only thing that ever happens in a video game is in the line of sight of the players who's playing it, and they don't really consider the greater world outside of like that 60-foot bubble, basically.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of DMing is it's the world building, right? And I think that's why they describe it a lot in the newer systems, that it is exactly that. It's about world building, that the structures, but it's, I think, yeah, you're exactly right. I think people start with the system. Oh, and you've played with me. I actually kind of disregard the system more or less. Like for me, the system only exists to check whether or not something is possible or plausible or will happen or won't happen, right? Everything else is a matter of fantastical design. Like I don't, and even for me, like stuff like spells and the way that they're used, those are all storytelling elements. And like you roleplay them very well in our group. Like when you say you're going to cast a certain spell, you say I retrieve a piece of the component and I gesture a certain way. Like those are pieces that are there to add to that world building, and a consistency across those efforts kind of like makes it really compelling, right? Because if it's always that piece of sulfur that, or or you're excited about a certain component your wizard is, but not only that, every wizard in the realm has those same concerns. So there's a consistency that kind of builds it past the party's awareness that is interesting. But yeah, I think early on you're right. There's a number of kind of early mistakes that I've always made where it's just worry about how much damage the character can do and that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter really at the end of the day, because I think the most compelling moments in Dungeons and Dragons are when everybody's excited about something that was unexpected, that maybe the dice roll put some weight on it by it being a difficult or like a low chance situation, but it really was the way the story was told that made it more like everybody remembered it.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%, because none of my favorite moments from role-playing at all have come from dice rolls. It's always been an interaction with two party members, or a party member and NPC, or something like that. It's never an attack. Sometimes it's how the attack is role-played, but it's never the attack itself that has stuck in my mind.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Whereas it might have weight. Like it might have been like a 1 in 100 chance that this attack might have solved the problem, or else everybody was going to die, or whatever might happen. And so if there's a bunch of weight behind that roll, that might be interesting. But what people remember is the whole setup. Like, how did it get to that point where this one sword swing was the end all be all?
Exactly.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that sometimes, again, harping on the idea, the new DM makes a lot of mistakes. I think a mistake that a lot of new and even intermediate players make is the idea that the only thing that they can do during their turn is attack with an action or cast a spell with an action, and they don't ever really think laterally. And so because a lot of people, they're like, oh well, I just want to maximize my damage, my damage per round basically. So if I'm spending a round not attacking, well then guess what I am doing? I'm not doing as much damage as I could be. And they don't ever spend time to consider maybe what their character might do in that situation, other tactical advantages that maybe don't necessarily translate to great tactical advantages in the system, because D&D is a flawed system. But at the very least, there are other things like we had a player where the fight starts and it's like, I'm going to tackle the bad guy. Like, okay, I mean that's from a strict numbers perspective, that's probably worse than just doing 2 attacks with your extra attack.
Yeah.
But I like what you're going for, because I'm going to tackle the spellcaster, and then we'll just get into a scramble on the floor, and maybe he won't be able to cast his spell.
Right.
That makes sense from a logical perspective, even if it doesn't necessarily translate to the rules within the system. And I'd be more likely to give that guy an advantage on, maybe the wizard has disadvantage on trying to cast a spell, because now he's grappled and trying to, scramble to get his components out of his pouch, and he can't because his arms are tied up.
Right.
And I think,
and what's really going to sell it too, where the group is going to remember that is how you describe that scuffle on the floor, and you go into the details, the tangles of arms and legs and robes and stuff scattering across the floor out of his spell pouch and whatever else, right?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And even when it doesn't work out, you can still make that a really cool situation. There was a fight, a while ago. This is the fight where I disintegrated Dustin's character.
Huh.
But the fighter tackled the wizard, and they got into a bit of a scuffle. Well, the wizard was able to fire a disintegration ray, but he missed. So instead of just having him miss and do nothing, I had to disintegrate a portion of the roof. Guess what? The players realized exactly what it was really quick, and suddenly it made the fight that seemed like it was going okay into, oh shit, we may have fucked up here.
Yeah. They have much bigger weapons than we expected, right? Yeah.
They're level 6 or 7 at the time. This is way outside their pay grade.
I remember one of my very memorable alternative outcomes situations was remember a group that I was playing with. One of them was a bard, and not a very good fighting bard. Very charismatic, very intelligent, and kind of focused on spellcasting. Not super great at fighting. But he essentially, they were fighting hobgoblins or something, and goblinoids are very cowardly. Kind of says it in their description. They'll tend to run if you get them low hit points. They like to run if you get low hit points. But I remember they didn't even strike a blow, and there was a couple of them and a couple of the party members, and the bard was up first, and he decided to do a big flourish with his weapon, and then kind of like, aimed the flourish at the nearest hobgoblin. Was like, you don't really want to be here, do you? And then, influence, right? And then you guys rolled a great roll on the influence, and the goblins just kind of sort of backed up, like took 2 steps back. And then nobody did anything, and they took another couple steps back, and nobody did anything, and then they bolted for the woods, right? And it's like, it could have been a difficult fight, actually. But, because you played it out in a way that, like, actually takes advantage of the situation, and as the story, kind of should be told, then why not allow it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm curious to hear more, because I know that you're running a campaign right now as well, that I'm actually not a part of, so I only hear about it secondhand. I guess, have you experienced any of those moments recently that you thought were kind of nifty? Players thinking outside the box?
Let me tell you. So, this last session, actually, I have 3 players in my party, a ranger, a sorcerer, and a rogue, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And for various reasons, they're staying at an inn, and there's an elf lady staying in a room near them that they have recently become acquainted with. And somebody was trying to break into her room in the middle of the night. And the player characters moved to help her out, save her, and scare off the attacker. And the sorcerer is the one giving chase to the attacker as he flees. The assailant grows wings and starts to fly away, and the sorcerer decides to jump on his back and hold on for dear life as it takes off. And
okay.
The entirety of the combat encounter, the sorcerer was on this guy's back while the ranger was trying to get a clear shot at him. And it was going fantastically. The sorcerer was casting spells, and the guy couldn't really shake him off, and he was taking negatives to his attacks because the person he's trying to hit is on his back. So it's not hard to reach around behind you and attack, especially if you have to avoid hitting yourself, and you have wings growing out of you that you're trying not to clip because you're trying to stay airborne. And eventually, the sorcerer takes this guy down alone. Originally intended to be combat for 3 people. The ranger had gotten a few good shots in on the wings, so the guy could no longer gain altitude because there were now holes in his wings. But it was a great moment from the sorcerer that I just didn't see coming.
You never do, right? Like, as a DM, the players will always surprise you, and you may not know how exactly. It may seem like a very straightforward situation, but the players will never cease to find and do something that you don't anticipate.
Right.
It was great.
Yeah, and you don't expect the sorcerer to try to do anything front line, they want to stand back and pew pew a little bit, but but yeah, it's
fire their scorching ray or whatever.
Yeah, it's always fun.
Yep.
Or witch bolt or whatever else. But it's always fun for them to just dive on top. Whenever they do it, it's
oh shit. Because you know what it is that I think players will forget that the sorcerer can use a physical attack. There isn't much reason for them most of the time, but they can technically grapple somebody.
Right.
It's just not going to be very successful most of the time. So I think that it's I don't know. I always have been a really big fan of having subverted expectations, both in characters that I play and NPCs that I make, things like that. One of my most long-lived player characters I played was a Star Wars was a Sagas edition, and it was a Gungan medic, right? And he was like, it was like a middle-aged Gungan. Like, it wasn't even like a young, like 20. So the guy was like mid 40s, maybe like early 50s, like war veteran, had done his time in the army. I feel like Tracy is like, this is getting close.
Yeah. If you're calling me a Gungan, we have to talk about that friendship issue, that other friend.
No, you're much more, no, I mean, you're much more handsome than a Gungan would be.
Why, thank you. My face is considerably less fishy.
Yeah, and the ears are not necessarily as large.
Necessary.
And you're less frustrating to talk to than this particular Gungan.
Less horribly problematic cultural stereotypes. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. But anyways, what I was saying is that like that race or that species in sagas had a negative to wisdom, but being a medic, wisdom is the primary skill that I'm leaning on in order to like do my medicine checks and stuff. That and just playing a non-Jedi in a Star Wars roleplay game is also just unusual in of itself because
everybody wants to play a Jedi.
I don't want to play a Jedi.
I mean, you don't want to at least have Force sensitivity. What the hell is wrong with you?
Yeah, I did end up getting it like through story reasons, like significantly later, like level 14 or something. But yeah, the point being though is that like that's a character where it's like you take someone who's not very good at a thing or isn't expected to be very good at a thing, and then you play them as something that would be counter to that, like playing a dwarven wizard, which I also have played. Where it's like you expect the wizard to be the front line like paladin or something or a fighter. And no, I'm the dude who wants to stay as far away from the front line as possible. I have the constitution to take a few hits, but I don't want to be there.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's my shtick.
Speaking of though, why don't more people play dwarf wizards? Because you have the constitution buff to keep your concentration checks up. Like,
I mean, it's awfully good.
It almost makes sense.
I mean, I think actually it makes a ton of sense. I think just a lot of people don't. I'm just gonna call it like I see it. It's racism. It's racism. Everybody thinks that dwarves are little battle axe wielding, kind of grunty, right? Not super smart. Mostly bang on rocks. Drunkards. Scottish for some reason. I don't know what that's about really.
Scottish for some reason. I still don't understand that one.
Yeah, they're all Scottish.
I think that's Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is probably why. The dwarves in my campaign are Irish, just to subvert expectations.
It's not a big enough subversion.
I feel like there's a lot of Irishmen and Scotsmen that would disagree with you.
Yeah,
I feel like those people are too zeroed in on nationality.
I mean, it's not like I made him Catholic as well.
I don't believe you.
So,
yeah, I mean, well, what is Catholicism like? Was it like Lathander or? I think like what's the basic
no idea,
like?
Man. It's probably paler with more baptism or something. I don't get it.
Yeah. I think, but if I go back to I think that like, I think that's people's perceptions of it. Like, it's kind of funny to see. Like, you expect kind of everybody's got an image about how things should be in the fantasy worlds, and I think that people generally, they want to play out their, at least early on, they want to play out their imagination from the books that they read or the movies that they saw. So that a lot of times people's early characters are all like the super stereotypical dashing rogue and wizened bearded wizard and the beautiful elf maiden and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think those are pretty standard tropes. But then like you get into people who are, so I had a character that I played a long time that I loved, and his name was Michael Jackson, the singing dancing mage. And he was a bard, but he said he was a mage. And so he had like, and he was literally Michael Jackson. And so he would dance and sing and cast spells, but he would constantly be like, no, I'm a mage. And so yeah. So anyway, that was that was his thing. His whole thing was that, like, to him, all magic was magic, and he was a part of the magic ecosystem. And at that time, it was like there wasn't that many differences there. We didn't have sorcerers at the time yet. I don't think we had. Because we had mages, clerics, bards. Like, that was it. Well, bards were more fighters, right? Because it was bards and like rangers and druids. That was it, I think, if I remember correctly. We're like the spread.
Really to see.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting to see, like, they've added so many new classes, like, over the years. Obviously back in the day it was a lot more pared down, and then, like, as things have gotten more, as things have gone on, you can play more, like, new class options, but also in a lot of ways 5th edition makes it feel like all class choices are kind of trivialized because you can just be anything you want to be with the correct subclass. Like, casting is never off the table no matter what class you take now, which is something that I don't necessarily agree with, but I respect what the system's trying to do.
I feel like using magic should be really hard. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? It's like not. They do make it hard, but I mean, but as far as like every character being able to do magical stuff, it seems like I'm not a big fan of that decision either.
I mean, that's what multi-classing is supposed to be for.
Yeah, but you give up a lot.
Yeah, I agree.
To get it.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's in my mind, that's the point with multi-classing. You have to give something up to gain that ability to do something you otherwise couldn't. That's how I see it, anyways.
So,
like,
yeah, but like now it's just adding traits, right? Like you just take a trait and all of a sudden you can, or a feat.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm a arcane trickster, and now I'm a wizard and a rogue, or monks have a ton of magical abilities now that don't necessarily make a ton of sense, but they can do them, for sure.
Yeah, I think monks though are funny. Like monks were like, oh yeah, we got tired of just punching people. It's like not magical weaponry, right? Like I can't punch an undead to death. And it's like, oh well, or I can't get advantage on certain. I can't do some damage to some undead. So it's like, oh, we'll just give you the ability to shoot lasers out of your fists. Okay.
I feel like that's a trope that's been popularized by like Street Fighter and such as well, though. So like it's not totally out of left field like it would have been, maybe during a different time frame. But I feel like a lot of the people who are playing D&D nowadays are like their familiarity with like the monk like archetype is much more from like Dragon Ball Z and Street Fighter than it is from like the classic like Shaolin, like old style movies.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like when someone's like, "Oh, I want to be a fighter. I want to be Ryu. I want to be Goku." It's not really like I'm going to be that dude from Shaolin Soccer.
Right.
I want to be that dude from Shaolin Soccer.
I want to. Oh, Steven Chow.
Mm-hmm.
I would want to be I want to be his character from Kung Fu Hustle.
That's a good one.
Another solid movie.
What he's at the end when he's doing the Buddha palm finally. And like, there's that giant handprint on the whole building block after he hits him one time there. It's like, oh god.
Yeah. So we did actually have some questions in chat. So just one I wanted to ask. Shinfitz was asking, how do we construct our campaigns? Are we like planning everything from the beginning, or do we more shoot for the hip? So I'll let you guys answer before I kind of go over my personal style.
After you, Tracy.
I'm sorry. What was the question again for Shinfitz? I was reading the other comment from the Kamehameha in Tayogetsu.
So go ahead.
Shinfitz was asking on Owen's chat, how do you guys like to construct campaigns? Do you plan everything out from the beginning, or shoot from the hip every session?
I'm kind of a mixed blend of that, right? Like, so there's stuff, and actually, this is I admitted as much to Owen from our last session. Like, so for instance, we use VTT, Foundry VTT right now for our platform, so we can play together remotely. And there's a lot of tools there to like bring in stuff from beyond and so on, right? So if I have ideas for like encounters or areas that I want them to be able to explore, or people that I want them to be able to meet, I'll bring things over and just doctor them up really fast. So I have an NPC that I want, that I, NPC archetype that I want. And then I'll kind of give myself notes of like who these people are. I believe that like, just like any entertainment, it's about people. And I think the mistakes that everybody makes early on when you're writing anything, you forget to make it from a people's perspective. You talk about a lot about like the cool armor people are wearing and the weapons that they have and the food that they eat or whatever else, but you don't like the interactions that people have is what creates actual drama, right? There's no drama without people's interacting. And so for me, I think the things that I try to prep the most are like NPCs and other stuff. And it's funny, like no matter how often you do that, everybody wants to know about the character you didn't prepare for, right? I tend not to try too hard. I'll do is I'll kind of give myself a few archetypes that I can then bring into play. And I try to give myself some guidelines there. But then the other thing that's important is that like there's story hooks for characters. And I've been trying to bring in the players' backstories more recently because I had been playing through the campaign using books that I had liked. So like I started them off with Fandelver. Then we did a bunch of stuff from Saltmarsh. And Saltmarsh was an old series that I loved. Like Saltmarsh was one of the first modules that I owned, so I wanted to take them through that. And then at some point, I think I got bored of it, and then we took it off the reservation for a while, and then we kind of brought it back. But then I added a bunch of stuff. Anyway, a good example of this was last session where where they're in Neverwinter, right? And Neverwinter's a big town, and there's maps, there's established information that I can pull in that I can use for references and visual modeling and kind of help guide the conversation while we're playing. But there was a moment when Owen's character wanted to do some stuff and visit some old locations that would have been familiar to his character. And she wanted to visit the grave of an old mentor. And so I hadn't really explored her backstory as much as I'd like to have up to this point. But it's kind of like I don't want to do things that are forced. So I gave myself a challenge in that I created an impossible to miss like MacGuffin basically to then hook in further things. But I don't have anything attached to it already. It's just I've put the MacGuffin out there, which could be anything. And then now I'll go back and start writing the background of that so that it gives it something to fill it in with, if that makes any sense. So in this case, because, I'm kind of dancing around it because I don't want to give too much about what's on the other end of it. But like, Owen's character found a ribbon of carved runes around the grave statue of her mentor, and so there will being that her mentor was a senior mage, and we're dealing with the Mages Guild, and there's some treachery going on in there. It will eventually we'll find out where that ribbon came from and what words were transcribed there, and they'll obviously have something to do with that, right? But exactly what it is, right? It's it's interesting enough
at the
of a
time
hook.
you didn't know.
Yeah, and I don't have to because I could just plug it right into something else, right? And if you had just looked at it and said, well, what is that? Oh, is it cool or whatever? You could have taken a different path with it, and I haven't burned it. I haven't spent a bunch of energy on something that doesn't get acknowledged. So yeah, half and half.
I agree. For the most part, I'm largely the same. I'll come up with the overarching story that I want to tell, beginning and end, one or two things that I want to happen in the middle. But I kind of just let the players take control. Wherever they want to go, whoever they want to talk to, I kind of just roll with it. And like we were discussing earlier, I have a lot of things happen regardless of the player's presence at the events. And those things will happen either way. And if they're there, they have a hand and they change the outcome. And if they're not there, something will happen. Usually it's something bad and they'll feel the repercussions later. But I kind of just let the players do what they want and see what happens.
Yeah, I think that my position on it's changed over the years. Like when I first started out, I was very much a proponent of like the illusion of choice, where it's like I have provided like what look to be forking paths, but really they all lead to the same place. And I still do that from time to time, where it's like, oh, you can go north or south. What town do you want to go to? And it's the same fucking town. Like I'll just whatever I have planned for the next town is going to be there regardless where they go. Um, but I think as I've kind of allowed my current campaign to go on, I'm becoming more and more of the opinion of allow them to go places, but within reason, and try to keep as many plates spinning as you can. Um, one of my biggest like downsides is that I'm really bad at taking notes about stuff that happens, so I end up just trying to remember most of the stuff that I do, and just rely on the fact that my players are pretty okay note takers for the most part, or at least one of them is. And then from there,
There's always one
sometimes
decent one, and they save everybody else's bacon by doing so. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
Is
for
anybody
me, a lot of
in
it
our
is
current campaign taking notes?
Nick does.
Oh, okay. I'm glad somebody is because I'm not.
Look, you're playing like a cleric wizard, like multi-class or whatever. You have enough bookkeeping as it is. I don't expect you to be doing anything else. As long as your turns don't take like 10 minutes, I'm fine. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it is kind of like I have a general idea on like where I want the overarching story to go, and the majority of it is just kind of thinking about how those NPCs interact with the world around them. And like, I wish I was better at like sticking to the descriptions, but I really spend more of my time thinking about how those NPCs like interact, their personalities, and kind of what those interactions may look like in the future. At least for me. So I guess the short answer is I do preparation, but it's primarily on like a overall like story arc perspective, not really like a like session to session. Although I will say that since we've moved to online gaming, I spend way more time prepping my games than I have ever done in my life. Like 1,000% fold, because I can't just like draw something onto a map or whatever. Like I actually have to prep some stuff ahead of time for Roll20 to work.
Yeah, that's a very real online gaming thing, right? Like, because you have to have battle maps and stuff like that. And there's, you can download packages and stuff that'll just have, you could have them in store. Like, oh, I need a instant, somebody you've broken into some seer's hut in the woods. Here's that, right? But yeah, it's I liked what you're saying about kind of giving it like here's the broad strokes of where I want to take the story, and that I definitely do that, right? Like for instance, the segment that you guys are in now, I already have an idea of who the big bad is and, what the large challenges to be faced by the players will be, along with a couple of the encounters. But to be honest, the details can kind of float around a bit until we get to the point. And then, we can bridge the story elements together at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And like for me too, like I agree with what you did as far as just like kind of like you throw out like a plot thread here or there, and just kind of make it up as you go. Because I definitely do that as well, where it's like sometimes players do stuff that you can't anticipate, and so you just leave a plot thread hanging, and I don't know what's going to come of it, but I'll think about it later, and then I'll have an answer should it come up. So like a good for instance is like a couple of sessions ago, my players were on a different world. It's a city world, and they recently found out that the fighter in the party used to be a spellcaster in a previous life. He had his memory wiped and has been living a lie basically for the last 8 months. Like we completely like retconned his backstory basically.
It's all been a lie.
He was really cool with it. Like, I mean, honestly, like the player was like really, really chill with it, given that I didn't tell him beforehand. So like he was definitely a trooper, and he was really down for it. So like shout out to you, Nick. But this means that this character now has this history that he doesn't even know himself. So they're like, well, they're at a bank on this other world. They're like, well, did I have an account? It's like, oh, your loan is paid off 3 months ago. Like what? Like I don't know. I just made up a time frame. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. But now the players are like, well, shit. Now we have a lead to follow. Like, okay, he had a loan. When was the loan opened? 2 years ago. Okay, but we know where he was 3 months ago, and he definitely didn't pay this off. Who paid it off?
Right.
This other guy.
Right.
Like, okay, well, I guess we need to go find the other guy because he obviously knows our player character, but we don't have time for this right now.
So unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut out in a minute here. I'll leave the cameras up on my side, so you guys can continue. I apologize for my having to separate, but I wanted to add one more thing. You were talking about, oh my gosh, you're talking about Double Dragon having party member be the big bad. That's what Shinfit said.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up.
So one
Oh,
one that I well, this is actually a friend of mine, that colleague that I would do a lot of work with, and he started DMing last year, and he's been enjoying it and loving it, and he was telling me a story about one of his groups, or I think his main group, but he one of the players is a warlock, and he's been playing the warlock as the patron of the warlock. Did you lose video there?
I think so. Hold on.
All right, there you go. Okay, so
There we go.
so he's playing a warlock who basically, his patron is an elder god, right? And so he figured it out where he's like, oh wait, so he wrote his own backstory for the elder god, saying that the elder god is actually not just patronizing the warlock. He's actually he's parasitically growing inside of his body until he can one day take over and destroy the world by taking over the body of this warlock. But he doesn't know. He just thinks that he's been given extra power from this elder god. And meanwhile, there's this ticking clock going on in the background that nobody really knows about. So currently he's actually doing this part of the story where they're going to basically, he's dying, and he's going to do like a Jacob's Ladder type sequence where he's actually going to do separate sessions with different players to have them experience different things, so that this player is going to be they're going to be confused as hell. But like, basically they're dying and everything that they're experiencing is an illusion. And depending on how they play it out, either they've got to end up fighting the elder god for a position of the body, or they defeat the elder god before he even transfers over. Right. But like, I just thought it was a very genius way to do it. You were talking about having, like, retconning somebody's backstory, and that's something that it is within your power to do as a DM.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I know, Marvin, you had one thing you wanted to add to that before Tracy gets out of here.
So Fitz had asked about having a party member be the big bad, and Owen has a great story about this, and we talked about it last time, but we have a lot of people who weren't here last time, and I think Owen should definitely tell that story.
So this is a Sagas game that I ran for a couple of years, but I want to say it was like the first 5 or 6 games we ran just as, straight, like, place to place. We're traveling on a ship. We go there. A big bad gets introduced, but like only in name, really. And like, oh, like he's the person who's funding some of these elements that we're playing against. My friend Bob was somewhat interested in joining the game, but like he wasn't sure in what capacity. So I approached him and said, "Hey, Bob, would you like to join my game as the main antagonist?" Because at that time, the main antagonist is a shapeshifter. So I had him join the party. He rolled up a whole character sheet. He said, "Hi, my name is Harry Fordson, and I'm an archaeologist." Because who's going to think the joke character is the big bad evil guy of the whole story?
Sure.
And he has a whole, fake character sheet with its own abilities, and he has his other like force abilities because he's a shape-shifting Jedi, of course, or evil Jedi. So like, there's a number of situations that would come up from time to time where it's like, oh shit, like what are we gonna do? And he's like, I got this. Let me take these guards into the next room, and then he would just mind trick them and come back. It's like, oh, I bribed them. It was cool, and no one questioned it. And just things like that would keep coming up, right? There was an instance where like there was they captured a prisoner who like who had seen the bad guy, right? And the prisoner ended up dead with like a sock stuffed in their mouth, and they couldn't figure out how did this prisoner who was bound, and gagged, how were they able to choke on their own sock? That doesn't make any sense. Well, it's because they were suffocated. But it got to the point where like I think Marvin had rolled like, I'm gonna roll like a biology check or something. Like, could this person conceivably like swallow their own sock if they were bound and tied? And you're like, I don't know, maybe if they were like a contortionist or something. And that was the best explanation they had. So they just went with it. Like, all right, I guess this is a contortionist who had a death wish.
They use their powers of contortion to kill themselves. Okay.
And not get out.
Well, I mean,
that's the obvious answer.
I mean, it's a common thing to, like, if you're trapped somewhere and there's no way out for you, to just, take the cyanide pill. So it was reasonable that he would, just off himself and do whatever he could to make himself not alive anymore, so he couldn't talk. So it kind of made sense.
Fair enough. Shot himself 6 times in the back of the head. Got it.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So anyways, long story short, they were basically following this new player. This new player basically hired the party to go find like an antidote for his ailing grandfather who didn't exist. So that's what the party did. They uprooted everything that they were doing and they went to go like, all right, we're going to go explore this hell, temple that you found somewhere on this deserted planet with no atmosphere. And we're going to go, diving into this temple to go find this antidote. And it was like a Sith ruin or whatever. And he just wanted the MacGuffin at the base of at the bottom of the temple. They get to the final room, and at that point, the big bad evil guy kills one of the well beloved NPCs that was with the party, and initiated a final encounter, and it was great. I did one scene, like 2 sessions, or like the session beforehand, where basically they passed through like an ethereal realm, and everybody did like a mind meld thing, where basically I had everybody do a short story of like an event from their character's background, and they traded short stories. So like basically their character woke up with like a fragment of a memory from somebody else. And what I did was the big bad evil guy and the NPC, they had a shared history together where they were mentor and student, and they had a falling out. So what I did was the player and myself wrote 2 sides of the same story and handed them to different players, so that when everybody shared what happened, what they saw, and everyone realized that there was one person whose backstory doesn't line up because we got 2 versions of the same events, and this Harry Fordson guy doesn't have any story from his background. At that point, it's like, hey, wait a minute, are you really who you say you are? And then at that point, initiative starts, decapitate the NPC, things happen. And it was a long campaign went on for like 2 years.
Nice.
So
it was great.
Nice.
And no one saw it coming, which was the best part.
All right, with that, I'm going to step out. I'm going to go ahead and leave this running. I'm going to close down my streams, but you don't have to do a thing on your end. I'm just going to put a blank logo on my screen, and I'll check in with you guys later.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tracy. Really appreciate you stepping by.
All right, thank you guys for having me.
To your stuff in the description of the YouTube video.
Appreciate it. Bye, everybody.
Adios, man. So, sweet. That was really awesome of Tracy to stop by.
Agreed.
And if you want to stop by and shoot the